Hi, welcome to Always Andy's Mom, episode 336. And I'm Gwen Kapcia. I'm filling in for the month of February for Marcy, and we're doing a little educational piece. And for those of you who are maybe listening for the first time, and especially with me being present here, I just invite you to go back and listen to the two previous episodes because we've been kind of building on things and we've talked about what makes grief difficult, what the experts say we need in order to heal. And today we're going to talk about coping as a family and some of those big feelings and emotions. So we'll get to as many as we can, but I welcome you and so grateful that you're here. So, um, last week, I talked about how individual grief is and how it's just different for each one of us, and that there's many things that factor in. Now I feel like I'm almost contradicting myself by saying that it's such a family experience, but it's both. There's many people, individuals that make up a family, and grief is very much a family experience, but each individual person is experiencing the same loss differently. And that's why when we're in our families and we think, that person just doesn't understand me, we can withdraw and close off communication. And many times in the first year, people do not feel understood. And some of the other things with grief, especially if you have children, I'm going to kind of talk about families for the first part today, and then we'll get to the big emotions and how to work through some of those. But with families, sometimes the preoccupation with grief, we talked about how physical it is and how overwhelming and how you're just trying to function and survive. And we kind of forget about maybe the routines that we used to have, the bedtime routines or the planned meals together or a family fun day on Sundays, and you just don't feel like being fun anymore. And so you don't have that. And maybe you had some built-in times that you chatted with each other, and now those times everyone's kind of retreating to their own space. But here is one of the pieces of that is that children need that stability, and we're going to talk about that and some of those routines. But as adults, we're hurting so much that those routines may be very hard to keep going or even know if we want to do them. The higher the need to be understood, the less capacity we have to be understanding. So in that meaning, we just, if you're not understanding me, then I'm not understanding you. And that's why in the context of a family, communication and compromise are the two key words. That works with the holidays. It works with just about everything that we need to say, this is how I'm feeling, hear how the other person's feeling, and what would the compromise be. And I'm just going to share again. I want to always say that I have people's permission to share. This family I worked with for a very long time, and they touched my heart in so many ways, and they have allowed me to share some of their story to help other people. So there was a family whose 15-year-old son attempted to end his own life, and he lived on life support for about 9 months. And they had a surviving 13-year-old son who, in those 9 months where the parents were hoping and waiting for their son to recover, he was cared for by people in the neighborhood, family, church. He went on and tried to have life as normal. Unfortunately, at the end of the 9 months, they did remove their son from life support, and he died. So their grief journey began in a completely new way of life without him, that this is real and he's not going to recover. So I'm going to fast forward. There were some behavior problems. The son was very angry, especially at mom, the surviving son, and she brought him in to talk with me, and she was concerned about his foul language and how he was, just snapping at her. And so when I started talking to him, he kind of used some foul language about mom not bleeping cooking anymore. And she's like, you're upset because I don't feel like cooking? And, that communication, okay, tell me, I said to the son, what does that mean to you? And he said, for 9 months, I ate everybody else's food. I didn't know who was going to feed me that day. I didn't know if grandma was dropping someone off, if something else was, if I was on my own. And he said, I had to just get by because things were very critical. But now basically he wanted his mom back. He wanted those meals. And she's like, I am so broken and you want me to cook for you. And so again, hearing her and what she's going through and what those 9 months were like and what coming home without her other son was like. And again, he can't possibly understand it all. But so we communicated how each person was feeling. So we laid the groundwork. This is where we're at. Okay, what does a compromise look like? And the mom's like, well, if you think I'm making a roast every night, you're crazy. And the son's like, well, blah, blah, blah. And here comes the colorful language again. And so it started back up. And I'm like, okay, what would a compromise look like? So I said, Mom, can you cook one night a week? And she said, yeah. And I said, can Dad cook one night a week? Sure. I said to the 13-year-old, can you make something one night a week? And he said, yep. And I said, okay, we got 3 nights taken care of. Can we go out one night a week? Sure. Can we have pizza? Yep. Can we have leftovers? Yes. And then can we have sandwich night? And they're like, sure. So there's 7 nights. Mom only has to cook one. And that was the compromise that they had. And the son settled down, his language, his just the fact that they could then learn as a family to communicate and find the compromise. Now, I could tell these stories all day long, but I do know that sometimes seeking help outside the family is valuable in your adjustment process. Anniversaries and holidays cause typical regressions in grief. That's normal. And all of this takes work, right? It takes effort. The big feelings we're going to talk about in a minute, they all take effort to sort through, to look at, to say, how am I really feeling? Even this communicating with family, whether it's the holidays, to say, hey, we're not going to come to the Christmas Eve Mass this year. It's too hard. And what do you mean you're not coming? All that takes effort, but it's so worth it. It's worth it to take that effort to do these things as a family. And I'm just going to review a few things for families is kind of the tasks that families need. We talked about last week what people need, but families need, the first thing is a shared acknowledgement of the crisis or what happened. And that shared means that we share information openly and honestly. Those of you who have young children, we know we go to age appropriate levels, be simple, give pieces as they're ready. But if children are not given information and they're left to figure things out on their own, it's going to be more drastic in their mind and usually worse than reality of what they make up in their own mind. So giving them information. And it can happen very innocently. I worked with a mom who had 2 young kids. Again, I have her permission, but they had gone to church. It was a Sunday. They came home. They had a big ham dinner, and her husband laid down on the couch, and he died. And in her shock, all she kept saying was, we went to church, we had a ham dinner, and he laid down and he died. And she's trying to process that and just verbally talking about her day. But her 2 young sons were listening to that. And then over a period of time, they, went on with the funeral and they went on with things, and the boys were having some difficulty. And so one of the first things I said is, I always ask the children, because children need understanding. So I said, what do you understand about what happened to your dad? And they said, well, we went to church, then we had a ham dinner, then he laid down and he died. And I said, well, what happened? And they said, we don't know. Are you not supposed to eat ham after church? Are you not supposed to lay down after you have ham? Like maybe he wasn't supposed to lay down. None of the rest of us laid down and we didn't die. But see, just in the verbal processing, she didn't understand that they didn't know what part of that caused his death. And when I told them their dad had a heart attack, that you can't go to church and have a ham dinner and lay down, that's not what made him die, but that he had a heart attack. They were like, oh, we didn't know. And so if you're dealing with a critical illness or an impending death, be honest with the children about the prognosis, because hiding from them and having them try to figure that out, or them feeling like you have information and didn't give it to them, will be very upsetting. And we want them to trust us, right? And if we don't tell them the truth in these things, they have a hard time thinking that we're going to tell them the truth in others. So that first one is that shared acknowledgement about what happened. And the second thing for families is a shared experience of pain. Show children your painful side. Now, don't give them all of your adult pain or, ask them to be your helper or your listener. That's not what I'm talking about here. But if parents hide their feelings and they don't talk about someone, I have children say to me, if I died no one would really care. I say, really? And they go, yeah, because grandpa died and we don't talk about him. So sometimes not talking about something makes it seem like it just didn't matter and that life didn't matter. But more than that, just to say, I'm having a tough day. Or some people come up with code words that they say. So they know like it's just one of those days. When my father-in-law died suddenly and they lived across the street, my mother-in-law spent a lot of time with us. And so when she was having a hard time, my kids called their grandfather Papa, and I'd say, well, she's having a Papa moment. And I'm like, have you ever had a Papa moment? And they're like, yeah. So then when they had something happen, they'd say to grandma, I had a Papa moment at school because someone was talking about their grandpa, or their grandpa came and picked them up, or their grandpa came and, brought their backpack in. And so that they could have those Papa moments. Well, it was many, many years after my father-in-law died. I'm going to say 15 years, maybe. We were traveling with my mother-in-law at Christmas, and we were leaving my sister-in-law's house, and my husband and I were in the front of the van, and then my well into his teen years, maybe even college son and his grandmother were in the next row, and then our two daughters were in the back. We said goodbye, and we slammed the van door, and my mother-in-law just started wailing, sobbing. So my son, who's next to her, tried to make an assessment, like, did we slam her hand in the door? Is she mad? Was she mad at the people whose home we were leaving? What happened? And he's like trying to assess this, and we're just looking back like, what is going on? And finally he said, are you having a Papa moment? And she shook her head. And he said, don't worry, keep driving, I got this. Because again, they could talk about it. It was that shared experience of pain. Like, I get it, you're thinking of him. And I listened as we drove, and they started talking, and I heard my mother-in-law say, your grandfather would be so proud of his family, or he would have enjoyed this weekend of playing cards and all the things we did. He would have loved that. And so then years later, we still could call it what it was. So I would encourage you to come up with those things, to say, I'm having this time, or I'm feeling this way, so the children know and understand right away what that means. The next one is reorganization of the family system. There's a lot of role reversals. Next week, we're going to talk about reestablishing ourselves, and I'll tell a little bit more about this, but in the fact that as adults, it takes us a long time to establish ourselves. But as children, they need stability from adults very quickly. Like, who's going to drive me to school now? Who's going to make my lunch? Who's going to teach me how to fish? If grandpa was the one who was going to teach them how to fish. And the other piece is we have to be comfortable with chaos for a time. Don't fix everything at once. Allow a little bit of, we're going to figure this out, and allow for the reorganization. Because if we try to fix too quickly, one of the things that it does is make children think that everything can be fixed quickly. And as we know, grief isn't one of those quick fix things, right? It's such a long, slow process. So each and every day, we're figuring out who we are as a family and reorganizing our family system. Then the last thing is reinvest, redirections of goals, recognizing the importance of this, because one thing that children do need after the understanding, the place to put their pain, the remembering the person who died, is to move on. They need to be kids. They need to be able to go to prom. They need to be able to, still go to their soccer game, whatever that is. They're kids, and that's what they're about. And so allowing them to move on. I would wait for 4 seasons to pass before, making any major decisions, as we've talked about before. And as a family, just to say we're reorganizing, we're reinvesting. But I think the most important thing here is, the dangers of this is if we idealize the past, then it's too hard to reinvest in the future. If we are so focused on the past, then the children feel like, I can't move on and live life because we're so into what happened. And understanding, we're not talking the first couple months, but we're talking over a period of time as we grow and develop. And again, we'll talk about that next week. But I think the key thing here is to cheer each other on as a family, to be able to say, I'm proud of you. We're doing hard things. What do you need? Where does your help come from? Who is your support? Those kinds of things really cheer the family on would be my suggestion with that. So now that we're 15 minutes in, I want to be able to switch and talk about those big feelings. going to start with anger. Anger without action eventually turns to bitterness. Now, the first part about anger is to admit that you're feeling it. It's a legitimate human emotion. There's no cause for shame. There is not, it's not bad or wrong to be angry. It's what we do with it that can make anger inappropriate. So anger can be reoccurring. It can hit you at strange places and strange times. It's very unpredictable. And so we can just find ourselves also displacing anger at something safer that's really not connected to our family. So maybe you're yelling at strangers when you're out or screaming in the car at all the other drivers, and you've got that anger stewing in there. So we have to say, clearly I'm angry. Then the next part is to analyze it, to slow down long enough to say, what am I really angry about? Um, if I take COVID as an example, am I angry at God? Am I angry at medical personnel? Am I angry at, the perceived carrier? Am I angry at my person themselves for not being more careful and wearing their mask? Like, we had to really say, what are we really angry about? And the same thing goes with this. Anger is a very normal response to loss, but it can lead to blame, and then it becomes almost cosmic, and then you're mad at the whole world. And so we have to think, what am I really angry about? Maybe you're angry at a police officer for what they said. Maybe you're angry at a doctor or a nurse, a family member, something that happened, a decision that was taken away from you, whatever that is, to slow down and analyze that. Then the next one is to act it out in a constructive way. Physical exercise is the most frequently mentioned way to release anger. Crying is another. But, screaming into a pillow, having a punching bag, just letting that out. You can go to a smash room and smash plates. But there's other constructive ways that once you've taken the time and you're not reacting, you're more just responding to how you've analyzed your feeling, is that you may be able to make an appointment with that doctor and say, I know it's not going to change for our family, but going forward, maybe this is something you can do. You can write a letter. You can just sit down and say, that hurt me when that happened. And I want you to know that I forgive you, or whatever that looks like. If the anger is towards the deceased or the relationship that you had, writing a letter, saying it out loud, saying it to somebody else, going to the cemetery, burying the letter, burning it, doing whatever where you can get it outside of yourself. So again, without the action, that turns to bitterness, and we have that stewing inside of us, and we need to act it out in a constructive way. I'm thinking of I had a thought of somebody, acting it out in a constructive way when I said about doctors. I worked with a family whose daughter died on Christmas on the way home in a car accident, but they didn't know she had died. They just were told to come to the hospital. They were told to sit in a waiting room, that the doctor would come out and talk to them. And after they were there a couple hours, the doctor came out and said, are you so-and-so's family? And they said, yes. And the doctor just went like that and said, there's nothing I can say right now. And they're like, oh, okay. So he turned around and left, and they waited several more hours. And finally they went up to the nurse's station and said, we've been waiting so long for an update. And they said, the doctor didn't come in and give you an update. And they said, the doctor came in and said, well, there's really nothing right now I can say, and shrugged their shoulders. And she said, I'm sorry. That's your doctor's way of telling you your daughter didn't make it. She died in surgery. What did they miss? I mean, there was nothing I can say right now. He didn't say the word. So they were so angry that they weren't clearly communicated to say there was an accident. Your daughter's blah, blah, blah was injured. We took her into surgery. We worked, blah, blah. What, they needed that, and they didn't get it. So when they thought about it, they made an appointment with that doctor and said, it's not going to change what you did, but you got to figure out more than shrugging your shoulders for families. So that was a way that they could act that out. And I just realized that I'm sorry if I'm pushing buttons for people. I know in this education, using examples and things, you just go, oh, that hit too close to home. I'm really not trying to do that. I'm just using stories from real families in real lives like yours that have lived through these things. So the last part after you admit it, you analyze that you acted out constructively, is to abandon it. Once you get it out in the open, do not put it back on your shoulders. Talking it out, envisioning yourself. I wrote that letter. I went to the cemetery. I made that appointment. I talked to the doctor, and envision yourself just letting that go. Someone said hanging on to anger is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to get sick. It's bad for your body and your health to hold on to anger. Studies from Johns Hopkins reveal that forgiveness is better for your health. And so do the healthy thing and allow yourself to let that go. Because there are people, if you know, I'm going to hold up my folder here, that carry anger so much that they wear it like a shield and it hits you before they come in the room. Like it's so thick and you can just feel it. And it's like, oh, they're so angry. You don't want to carry that around. You don't want to have your anger enter the room before you do, right? So give yourself the gift of that and be healthier. So the next one is guilt. It's a lot like anger in the fact that we have to take time to analyze and look at what we're really feel guilty about. If there's cause for guilt for yourself, like you feel guilty, you can ask God for forgiveness. If by omission or commission, if you believe that you contributed to the loss, you feel a causation, like it's my fault that this happened, that is something to work through. Some people feel what we call mourners or moral guilt, where they feel that something is a punishment from a past act of theirs and often has a lot of spiritual undertones, that if I hadn't done that, this wouldn't have happened. We can look at role guilt. It perceives that not only were you weren't adequately fulfilling a role, not a good enough father. Recognize if you're a nurse and you didn't recognize symptoms of cancer in a family member, you think, "Oh, I'm the nurse. I should have known. I'm the this. I should have known." In military families, there's often it's a tradition that many people serve in the military. And I mentioned last week about my aunt not having a body when my cousin died in Vietnam, and all she got back was that triangular flag. One of the role guilt there was that his dad, my uncle, was a fighter pilot in World War II, and he put, encouraged his sons, like, you're going into the military. And then he had to live with that guilt, like, why did I do that? If I hadn't done that, he would still be alive. So we have some role guilt many times. Survivor guilt, you feel that you or she should have died rather than that person. It's not uncommon for siblings to feel that way if the deceased child is idealized, where they're talking just how wonderful and perfect and what an angel and how amazing the deceased child was. Surviving children think, wow, probably should have been me. Older or ill persons may experience this when someone younger or in perceived better health in them dies first. So think, how come I keep living? I remember when my grandmother neared the end, into her 90s, and she lived till her early 90s. She'd say, if someone else in the family dies before me, please don't tell me. She already knew she couldn't handle that. Then we have grief guilt. Sometimes people feel they're mourning too long or inappropriately. Recovery guilt. Am I doing too well? Am I moving on too quickly? I have joy. Is it really okay to feel okay? What if you're laughing out in public, you're at an event and your family's laughing, or you're at a game and you're cheering and you think, oh my goodness, look, we're the people whose child died or whose person died and everyone sees us clapping. We really, really, really need to know it's okay to be okay. Feelings of relief are not uncommon in grief. So people feel guilty that they might feel relief. The types of relief that people feel is an altruistic, like my suffering is over, or a relationship, their suffering is over, or dual, our suffering is over, and includes both. Relief is often a hidden emotion of grief, and we don't go around talking about it. So we feel guilty that we feel some sense of relief that at least I get to it. I mean, we've talked in support groups where a widow says, there are some benefits because now I get to run the remote control. And then they all feel this sense of guilt because they shared that commonality of it's nice to be able to watch what I want to watch. Um, then there's true guilt and false guilt. And, I will expand just a little bit, but if we experience guilt, even if it's not real, like we can feel guilty about something, but the feeling is still experienced. So we have to talk it out, and that will weaken the impact of unreal guilt, something that we didn't know or couldn't control. And it usually disappears over time. So here's an example. If your child comes and says, "Hey, I want to go to the movie tonight," and you say, "Who's driving? What time are you going to be home? What time's, where's the theater?" All this stuff, and you do all your research, and then you get a call that there's an accident and they had been out drinking and didn't go to the movie. The parents feel like, I should have known. But really, you probably didn't miss anything. They probably didn't give you any clues that they weren't going to the movie. They were probably very thorough on what time the movie was and who was driving and what they were doing. And many people just feel this guilt, like I should have known. And we have to release ourselves that there are times that we just can't control and we don't know what's happening. So one of the things, like in a situation like that with the parents, is this perspective to say, did I do the best I could with what I knew at the time? And that's one of the things that I have to help people process is at that moment when they were asking to go to the movie, all the information they gave you, did you make the best decision? Maybe even called the parents and said, are you aware that, so-and-so is driving and they're going to the movie at 9:00 at this theater? Yep, I know. Maybe you did all that. So you did your best. The other part was, what was my intention in making that decision? Your intention was your child came, they asked you if they could go to the movie, they're getting good grades, they're doing, whatever it was, your intention was for them to go out and have fun and have a good night. You didn't know what was going to happen. And so we have to look at that perspective and change the view on that. Shame, I can't go too deep into shame right now, but I just want to say that shame is the glue that keeps things hidden. Guilt is admitted, while shame is not open, and it continues with a lot of unhealthy talk, self-talk. Guilt says, I made a mistake, but shame says, I am the mistake. And we have to promote self-care. You're not a bad person. Rather than just saying something's wrong with me, use it to transform us and make our behaviors better or different. Go from judging yourself to changing behavior. So just being more compassionate with yourself rather than feeling like you are a bad person because this happened. And again, I believe with all these things, talking it out with someone else, whether it's a counselor, a trusted friend, is so valuable and helpful because we have to express our feelings. Then we have to validate them. But whether it's guilt, shame, or anger that we've talked about so far, we have to find functional ways to cope with them. And I want to just give a few more functional ways with guilt. We can ask ourselves, whatever you're saying to yourself about how horrible you are or the decision that you made to let them go to the movie, you ask yourself, what would you say to someone else? What advice would you give them? And if you would talk to yourself the same way you would someone else, right? And not be so hard on yourself. What would the deceased say to you? And respond how they would respond. If you were presenting your case to a jury and saying, this is how I feel, they asked to go to the movie. I said, yes, I checked with the mom. So-and-so was driving. They were going to this theater. I looked, what could they find you guilty of? Another question, a technique for functional ways to deal with grief guilt is, what does your face say to you? So you can filter it through that. And I really love the letter writing, like writing it out to say, I'm sorry that, I wish we had. If you go on and purchase the videos through my website, we have so many handouts, and one of them is a real functional handout that helps with this. And the prompts that say, I wish we had, please forgive me for, I wish you had. Why didn't we ever, blah, blah, blah. So I met a man who was married for, I think, somewhere close to 40 years. Typical family, raised their kids. He worked. They had a good life, but his wife died, and he realized that he was a man of few words, that she always wanted more communication. Why don't you talk to me? Why don't you talk to me? And he said, I'd come home at the end of the day and I didn't want to talk. So he said, I was very shut off. And he said, I'm the kind of guy who sends an email that says meeting at 9 in the conference room. That's it. He said, I don't say, grab a cup of coffee. It's good to be a team. Hope to see you there. He said, no, we're just meeting in the conference room. And he said, I realized that I did that same thing with my wife. Like, this is all you need to know. And he felt so guilty after she died. Like, why didn't I talk with her? Why didn't I tell her things? So he sat down and he started his wife a letter. And I will tell you that he wrote 4 letters, 20 pages each to her. That's a lot. And he said sometimes he takes out her picture and he reads the letters to the picture. So he works through that guilt of, I would have shared this. I would have told you this. And so he worked that out. So I hope those things are helpful for you. Another big emotion is jealousy. It's often the hidden emotion in grief. People don't talk about it. I heard it said that the commandments in the Bible, there's one about killing, one about stealing, one about adultery, and 2 about jealousy. So obviously they know it's a legitimate emotion, and but it's rarely addressed, but relatively common. It can be related to anger. Why my child? Why my spouse? Why my person? I know for me, in the years that we had of infertility, when I'd see people mistreating a child or hear things, I'd be like so jealous and upset. Or even when friends of ours would tell us that they were having a baby, I had this jealousy. Why not us? Like, why can't that happen for us? We don't talk about jealousy, but it is very real. And find a safe place to look at those emotions. And I love the fact that the world is so much more open now about feelings and mental health. So I have a daughter who has some friends who have had some infertility issues, and herself included, has had a rainbow baby after having a miscarriage. But when she's talked with some of her friends who still hadn't had a child, she would say to them, you don't have to come over and hold my baby and pretend that you're happy for me. You can come over and cry. You can come over and or you don't have to come over at all if it's too hard. And I love that. I love that. And so maybe just to say to your friends, it's too hard for me to see you with your child. And, I deal with this a lot with people in when their spouse dies, when people are complaining about their spouse, and it's like, well, I don't have a spouse to complain about. And so that can be hard. Another thing that happens is that when the socialization of the funeral process is over, we experience what's called estrangement, where people seem to avoid us for many reasons. They don't know what to do with us. They have this feeling like, we should be over it or moving on. And so what happens then is that we get, as the bereaved person, we get these messages like people don't want to hear this anymore, or life needs to move on, or we've literally been told that. And what we do is we isolate and we estrange and we just stop going places. That's natural at the beginning, but over a period of time, that estrangement can become a problem. Especially because we talked last week about one of the things we need people. We need people in our lives. And so I suggest that you, if you're refusing to leave the house, that you go on little errands at first, and each time have a little more people contact or take a little bit more time. Another problem opposite of estrangement is running, that people are so afraid to face the pain that they're just running and trying to stay ahead of it. And I just want to tell you again that facing the pain mellows the pain and removes the reason for running. So we do have to turn, I used this Scooby-Doo example last week about, running from things. Grief waits on a welcome. It waits on a welcome. Dr. Wolfelt talks about hellos and goodbyes, and there's so many hellos and there's so many goodbyes, but what it does is we can't run from that. We have to look at the hellos and we have to look at the goodbyes. Another big thing could be jumping back into life too quickly, right? Like the social pressure to stay busy, get back on that horse and ride. And if you have to force yourself to do every activity, then I would say that you didn't have adequate time to do your grief work. And I've seen this, and you'll know if it's you. You'll know. But where people, I can think of one young mom, she had two young kids. Her husband died suddenly, and she took, a few weeks off, but then really felt this needing to get back in and get life back for her kids. And, she was working and all the things that she had to do around the house now. But then it got to the point where she was completely immobilized and couldn't do anything. And I said, I think we have to go back and take some more time before we jump in to the main, the stream of life. Another piece with that is go back to work and school gradually. Go to your boss and your teachers or whoever and just say, my performance is going to be a little different for a few weeks. I'm not making excuses saying I can't do my job, but I'm asking for grace because I don't know who I am now that this happened to me, and I need time to sort this through. And so it takes energy to do that. And sometimes we feel there are certain places and situations where you just can't ask someone that because you just know they're not going to give you that grace. So if your work environment is hostile and they're not giving you the grace, sometimes people just do the work for the 8 hours and realize that when they go home, that's when they have to be more gentle and kind with themselves and find those ways to express, but it's not in their work environment they can do that. Another big emotion with grief is what we call shrine building. Not emotion, but just this need to keep all the things close to us. Not touching someone's room or their belongings is sometimes seen as respect for them. But over a long period of time, it can be a strong refusal that the death occurred, or a strong desire to avoid pain. Like that hurts too much. And I there was someone in my family who experienced a death, and so I would call them up and check on them. And finally, they said, "Gwen, I have a feeling you're trying to see how I'm doing since the death." And I said, "Well, I am." And they said, "Well, I'll tell you what. When I had a sore shoulder, I went to my doctor and said, when I lift my arm above my head, my shoulder hurts. And the doctor told me not to lift my arm above my shoulder." Okay. And they said, when I think about that person, it hurts. So I just don't think about it. So you asking me how I'm doing makes it difficult. That's a strong desire to avoid pain, right? Um, Sometimes we have to look at why we're refusing to do something. Now, disposing or giving away of someone's belongings should begin early. What I mean by that is if their shoes are right in the middle of the doorway, you move the shoes. But it's done gradually over time as you move them. Sometimes people appreciate help getting rid of belongings or sorting through things, and sometimes you want to do it alone. Sometimes you want to talk or pray or cry or listen to music or scream out. Um, you do what fits for you. And I tell people you'll usually know when you're ready to do them. But if you have an environment, and I've been in some shrines where it is such a monument to the person who died. And I told someone that I had someone tell me, walk gently to my living room because there's still some of my husband's hair on the floor in the hallway, and I don't want that disturbed. So she said, please tiptoe. I'm like, okay. So what I do know is that at the beginning, especially, we have things called linking objects that make us feel connected. And for many parents, we need to feel connected. We have jewelry, we have things that make us feel connected. But then over time, they become more keepsakes, right? That they're just so precious and we're always going to have them. And they reaffirm bonds of keeping them a part of your family. This is important. And it is a need, remember, to find a way to recognize that person. And so whether you have, hang their stocking at Christmas, whether you do a memorial for them or a fundraising or an event or something to bring awareness, those are all treasures and keepsakes. But we really have to look at Am I shrine building? Am I hanging on to this as a refusal to believe that this happened? I think the other thing that I've noticed is the more we um, build monuments for our deceased children, the more difficult it is for surviving children to feel that their life has value. Um, Another issue or problem is expecting too much. Not one person can meet all of your needs. So if you're putting all of your pain on one friend or your spouse or this person, you kind of have to divide it up. Okay. Um, and so kind of, and I mentioned like finding our support, who's the doer, who's the listener, who's the fun person. And so kind of spread that out. But here's another thing is sometimes we expect too much of ourselves. How do you really think you'd be doing right now? Like, you've never done this before. Our first time at anything, average is the best we can expect. I mean, ask a professional golfer how they golfed the first 5 years. They did not start out as a professional golfer. If you know a quilter, ask them about their first quilt and they'll say, oh my goodness, the back of their quilt. And they know, they can just see the progression as they got more expert, um, and more seasoned in being a quilter, that the back of their quilts look totally different now. Um, the same thing with grief is that, did you think you were going to do this all perfectly? Like, you've never done this before. So you're not going to be good at it. And no one wants to be good. And you weren't prepared in the first place. And it's something you don't want to do. So don't have those expectations of yourself that, oh, I should be doing this. Should I do that? Watch how you talk to yourself. Um, the perpetuation of grief is sometimes there's some secondary benefits in grieving um, that keep people around. And so we don't want to heal because it might keep people coming around. So my example was that as I went to visit a woman and there had been a little bit of snow. And when I got there, she had shoveled for my arrival where I parked, the sidewalk. And as we were visiting, she looked at her clock and said, oh, you have to leave. I've got to hurry up and put the snow back. And I said, excuse me? And she said, well, my son drives by after work. And if I haven't shoveled, he will come shovel and then visit with me. But if I've done it, he'll keep driving by. So we talked about the fact that having that, again, communication with him that says, I really like to shovel and I can do it. Now she's shoveling twice. She's taking it off and then putting it back on. But I also like when you stop by once in a while. So if it hasn't snowed, can you just stop by once or twice a week and visit with me for those few minutes? And because sometimes we might be keeping some of the grief alive because of the closeness or the warmth of having people around us. So we have to ask ourselves that. Another big obstacle or things with grief is what we call crusading, that we get caught up in a movement. And there are so many amazing things that are part of a crusade, that someone had a child who died or went through an experience. I mean, Amber Laws. I mean, look at America's Most Wanted with John Walsh and his child and what they've done. MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, all these things. There's so many laws. Many of you have done so many amazing things in your communities. Nationally, there's so many bills that have been passed that keep and protect people. And they're very good. They're very noble. They're life-changing. But I would just ask yourself, at what cost? And am I crusading to avoid something? Am I so focused? So I've had people say, I'd love to come to your grief class, but I'm working on getting this bill passed and I'm doing all this. And I watch them and they're so focused on that they almost think that then they don't have to do grief work. Like, oh, I don't need to be gone to a support group because I'm focusing on this. And sometimes it is easier because it gives us a task list of things that we can do. And, oh, I can do this, this, and this, and this. I know someone who was going through a divorce and had a cancer scare and had some testing. And then they found out that they didn't have cancer. And they said, oh, I'm kind of bummed. And I'm like, what? And they said, because at least if I had cancer, I'd have a treatment plan. I'd have a team of doctors. There'd be like, we're going to do this today. We're going to take this medicine. But she said, with my divorce and my marriage and my family turning upside down, there's no team. There's no treatment plan. There's no meds I can take. And so sometimes having something that says, I can at least do this. But if we're avoiding our grief work, then it can become a problem. And if it's overriding your living children or your family for the security and the things that they rely on you for, then I think we do need to look at that. I have a few more I'd like to do before we're done for today. One is the loss of identity, and that's a loss inside of a loss. Who am I now that this happened to me? And there's so many roles that we play, and our self-esteem is affected. We're connected. Life's meaning is connected to the existence, how we're tied to other people. I'm looking at my fingers here being like two wedding bands, and that happens in all relationships, a parent-child relationship, a marriage relationship, that when that person dies or goes away, we feel like a half a person, and there's loneliness, and there's just feeling like life isn't worth living, or we don't have anything to offer. And because it's a blow to our self-esteem, I would like you to think about an assignment that I give, that you draw a line down the center of a piece of paper. On one side you put plus, and one side you put minuses. And the minuses are maybe some liabilities or things that you might not be so good at. And then the pluses are things that you are good at. That you can offer to society, that keep and goals for both. Like, I want to work on some things, but I'm not so concerned about the negative. But when I think about many people who feel that their life is over and they have nothing to give, you got to look at, what do I still have? What can I offer? And then some goals to fine tune them. Don't blow this off as being too simple, or maybe not related to your grief, but repeatedly I hear people say that reworking their self-identity played a major role in their recovery and reshaping them. It's when we concentrate on what's gone forever, that can be very frustrating. But what do I do with what's left that counts? And that can be very life affirming. I have many examples, but I just want you to know that people have had such a blow to their self-esteem that they say, I have nothing. But when they do this and they say, but I can still do this, or I still have that, and they make goals for that, it is more life affirming to say, I am alive and I can do these things. So I'll leave it at that. Like I said, I don't have time to teach for a long time on each thing. So that makes it hard, because I want to sit here and talk about that for another half an hour, and I can't. Being depressed with grief is very common, because if you think about what depression feels like, you can be tired, sluggish, worried about the next event, crying, poor memory, loss of self-esteem, insomnia, or the opposite, sleeping all the time, the loss of appetite or eating all the time, feelings of boredom, agitation, tense, restless, inability to concentrate. That sounds a lot like grief, right? Grief and depression do go hand in hand. As my mom would say, they're kissing cousins. But we know is that the depression that comes with grief is temporary. It's not chronic. It's not permanent. It's not severe. There is not a diagnosis. Now, without going into details of a diagnostic tool that is used by mental health professionals, that there wasn't a category for grief early on. And so when someone saw someone and they were billing their insurance, they'd have to put them in a depressive category. And now we have other codes that are not mental disorders, realizing that when someone comes in for grief, they do not need to be diagnosed with a mental disorder. And one of the terms, and they rework this all the time, and they add things, and there's controversy. Is there prolonged grief disorder? After a year, can someone be diagnosed with that, what that looks like? But as someone who is thankful that other people do research and care about this stuff, I want to get to the nitty gritty of what it means to you. Is that the code they came up with, when someone comes to see someone who's billing their insurance for the grief they are experiencing, again, they no longer have to put them under chronically depressed, severely depressed, bipolar, anything like that. They have adjustment reaction depression. I like it. I do. I like it. You are adjusting and reacting to the single most devastating thing that happened to you. And that's very freeing. So someone can say, what's wrong with you? You can be like, well, you want to know what's wrong with me? I have adjustment reaction depression. Lastly, I just want to talk about our loss of faith. that is one of the big obstacles that can come up too, is where is God when it hurts? I feel so forsaken. I must have done something to deserve this. I just want you to know that death does not change who God is, but it severs our ability to believe he has any ongoing interest in our lives. Marcy and I have done a full episode. Forgive me for not knowing the number, but if you go to her page on episodes by category, scroll down to the episodes with Gwen, you'll see where we looked in depth at our faith and what happens, because it is so natural, because it brings meaning and purpose to life. And when that's challenged, we're like, what's the purpose? Why did this have to happen? What I want to encourage you to do is look around. And because many times we look up and it's like, God, where are you? I don't see you. And instead of looking up, look around. Do you see the sunset? Do you see some neighbor, coming over to ask how you're doing? Do you have someone send you a text, send you something that says, I'm thinking of you today? God uses other people to restore our faith, to say, here, I'm here with you. But lastly, I just want to say that it's okay. Suffering's okay. The Bible says in Matthew 5:4, blessed are those who mourn. We learned in the first week, mourning is that outward expression of grief. So as you're doing that, it says they shall be comforted. And think about it. If you don't ever tell anyone who you are, people can't comfort you. So taking the instruction or the example from scripture about letting your feelings out and lamenting and allowing for that. I believe that lamenting, which is a passionate expression of sorrow, is just as valuable as praise, right? But yet we don't always acknowledge that. So kind of like I mentioned before about guilt and all these other things, I think the most important thing is expression. So express yourself in your faith. Even if you can't pray wordless prayers, just moaning out to God, but express yourself. Practice what you believe, even if you don't feel like it. Try going to the service, go to a different time, go to a different one, sit in a different place. Practice your rhythms, whatever readings, whatever your faith is, practice that. And then lastly, just rest in it. Just rest in it. Come unto me, all ye who are labored and are of a heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Cast all your cares upon me. I think that one's 1 Peter 5:7, I believe. Forgive me for not having a reference for all of these, but cast all your cares upon me because I care for you. Just rest in that. Just say, God, I can't deal with this right now. It's too much. It's too big. It hurts way too much. Ooh, that was a lot. Some of you are taking notes. Some of you are writing this all down. Some of you are just listening and absorbing. But as I've mentioned, Marcy and I have offered a coupon. If you would like to purchase through my website, please don't go directly to my website without getting the coupon from Marcy or I. And I believe she'll post both of our emails. Mine is gwen@grief-guide.com to extend a discount savings if you want to watch more in-depth videos on what I've been teaching on and get the handouts, or if you'd like to have a session with checkpoints with me, or both of those. And then also, if you are in the position where you're helping others and you want to lead a group, I have some resources for that too. So I just want to encourage you in that. I'm kind of sad that our next time is coming up, next week, but yet I think the time to process, but I just want to encourage you to listen next week, because we are going to kind of wrap this all up and give encouragement for how am I going to manage this in the long haul. And it can be done. And when I started this by talking about families, I want you to know that children who experience loss, adults who do go on and live meaningful lives. And I was sharing this story with someone that when Billy Crystal won one of his first Emmys or Grammys or whatever he won, no, probably not a Grammy, that's music, Emmys, I don't know, an Oscar, Barbara Walters interviewed him. And she kind of likes to dig in there. And she said, Billy, your dad died when you were 15. What did that do to you? And he said, it's still doing to me, right? Like it doesn't stop. But also the parallel of that story is it also didn't stop him from having a meaningful, full life that was successful and had a lot of amazing things in it. And the same for you, that if you're struggling with any of these big emotions, that's part of your story, and it's still and always will do to you, but it doesn't have to stop you from having a meaningful life with good things in it. Take care.